As you'll recall, major revelations last week when the three scientists who fell sick with COVID-like symptoms in late 2019 were finally named by an independent media outlet, Public. One of those scientists, Ben Hu, featured in my book, published nearly 2 years ago. Our investigation had exclusively revealed that Ben Hu started a gain-of-function project funded by the Chinese government looking at 2 new bat coronaviruses. His project was called The Pathogenicity of 2 New Bat SARS-Related Coronaviruses to Transgenic Mice Expressing Human ACE2. In other words, he was conducting gain-of-function experiments to see if 2 new bat coronaviruses could infect humans. His findings were never published. We don't know the names of those 2 new bat coronaviruses, and the details of this project were wiped from the National Natural Science Foundation of China website. Again, this project started right before the pandemic in January 2019. Now, the reason this matters is because if these names are accurate, Ben Hu and his colleagues Yu Ping and Yan Zhu, well, they could be patients zero. This leads the pandemic once again directly back to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Now, another development. A group in the United States, White Coat Waste Project, took the National Institute of Health in the US to court, and through a lawsuit, they gained access to documents that the NIH wanted to hide. These documents, obtained via the 2021 lawsuit, shows that the project I wrote about was actually partly funded by the United States. It wasn't just the Chinese government. You can see the document on the screen now. Now, the White Coat Waste Senior Vice President, Justin Goodman, joins me from Washington live right now. Justin, it's excellent to see you again. Now, this is fascinating, the revelations over the past week. Thanks to the independent media outlets, we know the names of the 3 scientists at the Wuhan lab who fell sick with COVID-like symptoms. This could have been the first cluster of the pandemic. Your documents that you obtained are fascinating. How much money did the United States contribute to these risky gain-of-function experiments that Ben Hu specifically was conducting?
Well, Sharri, first of all, thank you so much for having me and for your outstanding reporting on this since the very beginning. We couldn't have gotten as far as we have without you. White Coat Waste Project has... It's all true. White Coat Waste Project has been following the money to Wuhan since late 2019. We first connected the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, to the Wuhan Institute of Virology in early 2020, showing that the Wuhan Institute was eligible to get U.S. money. We then connected through a FOIA lawsuit the NIH to gain-of-function experiments that it was funding in Wuhan. Now the documents we've obtained directly connect the NIH to Ben Hu. According to the records we have through this lawsuit, the Ben Hu received portions of $41 million in U.S. taxpayer money from the National Institutes of Health and USAID through a program called PREDICT. Now, a government watchdog report came out last week. The Government Accountability Office, an arm of the U.S. government, released a report last week indicating that of that $41 million, at least $1.4 million was funneled directly to the Wuhan Institute. And we now know that Ben Hu was the recipient of some of that funding from the U.S. government directly to the Wuhan lab through EcoHealth Alliance.
I mean, Justin, this is just enormous amounts of money. And the fact that you had to sue the NIH, take out a lawsuit to get hold of the documents that showed millions was going into the Wuhan Institute of Virology, specifically to the work of this scientist, Ben Hu, who then is understood to be, one of the 3 scientists who first fell sick in what intelligence agencies believe could have been the first cluster of the pandemic. I mean, it's really quite significant. Your documents also show that Peter Daszak from EcoHealth Alliance even called Ben Hu a co-investigator. So tell me about this connection between Peter Daszak and Ben Hu.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. In the documents we obtained through our lawsuit, Ben Hu is listed, as you say, as a co-investigator by Peter Daszak, specifically on the grant we now know funded gain-of-function experiments at the Wuhan Institute with U.S. taxpayer dollars. And actually, Ben Hu has been on our radar since late 2019 because we were first tipped off to the connection between the NIH and the Wuhan lab by a paper he published as the lead author in 2017 with Peter Daszak, where they were collecting wild bat coronaviruses in the wild out in China and bringing them back into the laboratory and creating laboratory engineering of these viruses to make them more virulent and contagious. And evidence apparently now shows that, according to public, those unpublished experiments did make the mice in these experiments much more sick than the wild coronaviruses. So Ben Hu, publishing with Peter Daszak as far back as 2017, he was listed as one of the co-investigators on the famous Diffuse project, which was basically the blueprint for SARS-CoV-2. Ben Hu was the main contact at the Wuhan Institute on Peter Daszak's application to basically create SARS-CoV-2 in the lab back in 2018. We know that they were denied funding by the U.S. Department of Defense, but evidence is available suggesting that they went forward with those experiments anyway. And I think the fact that we have Ben Hu ending up in the hospital in 2019 with COVID-like symptoms indicates that they went ahead with that project without the DoD's money and potentially using the NIH's money for it instead.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, at this point, I think we need the leaders of the United States, Australia, other Western governments to actually say to China, you need to come clean about these unpublished experiments, because there is so much evidence that we've uncovered that has led to this point. And thanks to you, Justin, and your team for your amazing research on this, for actually taking out the lawsuits to get hold of these crucial documents. Thank you very much for joining me from Washington.